Today, I wanted to give a speech about what I like about this show, Mad Men. This past summer, I actually watched it for the second time after having watched it last summer for the first time. And recently, after having finished it for the second time, I was going back through it and watching some of the episodes again to understand why exactly I felt such a strong attraction to this show and why I felt so emotionally connected to it that I returned to watch the same episodes I had done just a few weeks before that. If any of you have not watched the show yet, Mad Men is about an advertising agency, and it's set in the 1960s. The primary characters, or the primary protagonist is Don Draper, shown right here, and he's the creative director of an advertising agency. What that basically means is he's responsible for coming up with the ideas and the artwork behind the advertisements that this agency creates. One thing I really liked about Mad Men, just from the very beginning, is that it goes to a great deal of effort to maintain historical accuracy. Not only does the show incorporate real events into its plot, like the assassination of JFK, the Vietnam War, as well as civil rights riots, it also takes a lot of inspiration from other advertising agencies and their work in the 1960s. And so there's this interesting juxtaposition between the fictional ads that we see created by Don Draper and the real ads that were there in the 1960s. Just to give a quick example of that, these are two advertisements that we see in Mad Men. The left one is an advertisement that's completely fictional. It's created by the creators of Mad Men, and it's an advertisement for Heinz ketchup. What it basically shows is just a tantalizingly empty picture of French fries. And you as the audience can immediately see that the logical solution is to add Heinz ketchup. And that's the main punchline behind this advertisement. The funny thing is, this ad was created for the purpose of the show, but later on, Heinz ketchup actually took it from the show and made it into a real advertisement. So it's very interesting to see how the effort that's gone into making the show has actually paid off to make real advertisements. The one on the right here is a true advertisement from the 1960s. It's an advertisement for a contraption that Kodak made called the carousel. And it's essentially a slide projector. In that top ring over here, there are many different slots where you can put films. And this was essentially a way for you to play different pictures or go through a photo album along those lines. That's what the carousel was all about. What's interesting to me about this is that most of the advertisements we see today are on television. And televised ads, to be frank, are not really appreciated for their artistic content. We often just view them as a nuisance that we need to get through between the actual television that we're watching, whether it's a sports game or a sitcom, whatever it may be. And I think that back in the 1960s, when the show is set, a lot of these advertisements are made to go into newspapers or in posters. And the creators of these advertisements have to go to a great deal of effort to make sure they can capture the attention of the viewer. Because unlike a TV ad, you have to actively draw the viewer's attention to that part of the newspaper or to that page in the magazine. And as a result, these advertisements are artistically rich in how they're thought out and how they're designed for the specific viewer that they're targeting. Another part of Mad Men that I think is very noteworthy is that it's not just a show about advertising. It uses the characters and their roles in an advertising agency as a vehicle to examine the American dream. What I mean by that is, when we look back at the 1950s and 1960s, we often think of a time when everyone could strive to have a white picket fence, a home in the suburbs, a nice car, maybe some children. It was all a very idealized and glorified time in some ways when we're looking back on it in the history books. The problem that Mad Men really uncovers, though, is that the characters in the show who are predominantly white and are predominantly well off don't really feel that kind of happiness in their personal life. This shot that I have in this slide is actually a scene that's taken between Don Draper and Pete Campbell, who's another partner at this advertising agency. And Pete Campbell is from a particularly wealthy family, and he lives in the suburbs at this time. He has a nice home, he lives with his wife and his daughter, but he's constantly seeking out other women because he's unsatisfied with his marriage. And in addition, he doesn't feel connected to his family because he's never had a good relationship with his brother or his parents. In this scene, what actually happens is that Pete has had a physical fight with another one of the partners in the agency because he let his ego get out of control. And after this fight, he joins Don in the elevator, and Pete takes a moment to tell Don that he has nothing in his life. He feels devoid of any emotional attachments to people and any sources of joy in his life, despite having all of these material pleasures. What's interesting to me about this scene is that Don at this point is sharing similar sentiments about his own life, but he doesn't say anything in this scene. Rather, Mad Men uses this as just a moment for the two characters to silently reflect on their shared pain and their shared emotional loss in life. One other note about this scene is that it's shot in an elevator, and Mad Men does a great job of exploiting elevators as an interesting element in a set. What's nice about an elevator is that you can use it as a way to have characters who would otherwise not interact with each other suddenly happen to meet each other. So Mad Men exploits this to have characters who maybe are not directly related in the plot, but share some kind of tension. And there'll be many scenes which are often silent of just characters standing in an elevator and quietly waiting for the elevator to reach the floor that they're trying to get to. But we as the audience can look at that and live in that tension of that moment, which I think is a really powerful tool that Mad Men has. The final thing I wanted to say about Mad Men is that it's a show that explores a really tragic irony in Don Draper's own life. His job as an advertising director is to sell happiness. The customers who buy those products are eventually supposed to feel happy through the advertisements he creates. At the beginning of the show, he's actually able to use his personal life to deliver that sense of happiness. This is the pitch he gives for that Kodak carousel contraption. And essentially what he does is that he takes pictures from his own life, from when he was raising his kids, when he was married to his wife, from the wedding night itself. And he uses these pictures to say that we can use a machine like the Kodak carousel as a time machine. It can take us back in time to a place where we ache to go again because we have that nostalgia for it. But as this show progresses, Don's personal life becomes increasingly sad and increasingly filled with conflict and desperation. And toward the end of the show, we're left at a point where his personal life is actually leaching into his professional life in a way that negatively affects his work. At one meeting, he actually lashes out at a client, demanding why they're happy with their current state of being. He says that happiness is just a moment before more happiness. And in that moment, we can see that he's not talking about the client, he's actually talking about his own life. He's been so tired of experiencing the same kind of despair and sorrow that he feels his own sense of happiness has been lost down the drain, and he wants to convey that to the clients. So overall, I think Mad Men does a great job exploring the emotional intricacies of the American dream, as well as breaking down some of the cultural stereotypes behind what the 1960s were like and what advertising was like back then. Overall, I think it's a great show to watch if you're even remotely interested in dramas on TV, and I highly recommend it for any of you who haven't watched it yet. Thanks.